Hello everyone and welcome back to the much belated final episode of Killershrewfan's 12 Days of Reviews. Every year I like to close out the season with a bang by reviewing something big and something amazing, and this year I have just the thing. It's the W-Dragon Giraffatitan. Released amidst the raging dumpster fire of 2020, I had originally planned to feature this beautiful statue as the final installment to last year's 12 Days of Reviews, a high note to cap off an otherwise sour year. But as you might have guessed, shipping delays prevented it from arriving in time. In fact, after ordering the figure in November, I would end up having to wait until early March to see head or tail of the piece. Just as I was ready to give up hope, and mere days before the order closed on AliExpress, I noticed a postal worker carrying a massive box up to my doorstep with the Giraffatitan silhouette adorning the side. Needless to say, it was an exciting day when this finally came home, and now we're going to give it the 12 Days of Reviews treatment that it deserves. Before getting into the review of the figure itself, it is worth noting just how unique it is to have seen something like this from W-Dragon. Even before they received the official license, it would seem they dealt primarily in Jurassic-inspired products. There were a few outliers, namely their older Allosaurus, but the majority of their pieces were unofficial JP releases, or at the very least, heavily stylized takes on other non-canon dinosaurs. The fact that it was a massive, solid sauropod, something no company seems to want to do anymore, made it all the more special. Granted, we do see Brachiosaurus in Jurassic Park, and maybe that's what they were trying to emulate, but the fact that they called it Giraffatitan, which it clearly is, really makes it feel like they were trying to do something different and a little more faithful to the real world. With this in mind, how did W-Dragon do with making a more scientific sauropod model? Well, let's find out. So going in for a closer look at the figure and starting at the head as we usually do, W-Dragon sure is giving us a lot to love even on such a small surface. You can see the classic image of Giraffatitan, and by extension the mainstream idea of Brachiosaurus, beautifully captured on the sculpt here, with a prominent quote-unquote helmet feeding in a U-shape down into the snout. The nostrils have been properly placed on the nose of the figure, and you can even see when the light hits it right that some glossy snot has been added to sell the realism of the piece. The figure has been sculpted with the mouth open, as if in the process of calling out or perhaps grazing, and you are able to see those meticulously sculpted and painted peg-like teeth surrounding the wide pink tongue as a result. And while we're here, you can also get a good look at the wide skull restoration associated with Giraffatitan. As far as the fine details go, you can see all of the forms of the head have been saddled with wrinkles and striations, as well as some feature scales along the lower mandible and just above the eyes at the base of that helmet. The eyes themselves are a sort of hazelnut coloration with a pinpoint pupil. And that's the head of this thing, beautifully done, but a mere taste of things to come. Moving down the massive neck of this figure, I must say I really appreciate the gradual widening we see as we approach the torso, where you can see all of the massive tensing muscles and cords flexing to hold the head aloft. These muscle tones are apparent up and down the entire length of the neck, tapering as you move back up to the head. All of this has then been covered with that classic elephantine skin texture and striations, which run vertically up and down the length of the neck. From the front, you can see how they sort of buckle and deepen into more V-shape as we approach the pectorals, where you would expect all of that skin to hang and gather beneath the weight of the folds. Once you hit the torso, you can see the massive shoulder blades just past the base of the neck and above the swell of the gut. The wrinkled skin texture continues here as well, running over the shoulder and down onto the flank. And I'm a big fan of how you can see it sort of stretching out with the bulge of the stomach there. I also love all of the gathering folds down around the underside, and all of the buckling skin created as the arm braces back and the thigh pushes forward against the torso is very well handled. This also leads to some nice tension lines adorning the flexing muscles at the base of the shorter tail, and as you can see, all of the striation and skin detail continues all the way down to the tip. The opposite side is much the same story in terms of the detail, with the leathery skin texture and areas of gathering wrinkles and sagging folds, although we do get some variation in how the skin moves thanks to the positioning of the legs. For example, the back left leg is braced, which leads to sections of skin being pulled away from the torso. Meanwhile, features like the massive shoulder blade and robust thighs are once again present here. And speaking on the limbs of the figure, you can see that the pillar-like arms are proportionally longer than the back legs, as you would expect, and the muscle tones are beautifully done. On the front legs, you can see how the massive bicep just sort of feeds right into the muscles of the forearm, as we make our way down to the wide ankles of the feet. The toes are all properly encased in that fleshy mitt, save for the thumb claw, which has been beautifully done in grays and browns and lightening to a cream tone as you move away from the base. And it all bears a nice shellac finish to give it a keratinized appearance. It may be small, but I will say it's one of the more realistic treatments I've ever seen on a model claw. Once again, the way the skin moves here is all very believably done, stretching tighter over the bent face of the ankle there, while also bunching up at the elbows and other joints of the figure. Meanwhile, on the back legs, you can see how the skin sags over itself and folds, which helps to sell the weight of the flesh as the animal pushes off against the ground. One of the feet even has a slight lift to it, and the bunching skin helps to convey that movement of the bent ankle quite well. The digits and number of claws are once again correct, and the claws feature that same beautiful and realistic paintwork we saw on the thumb of the front limbs. Meanwhile, you can also see how the skin stretches tighter over the bulging calves and gathers at the kneecap as we make our way back up to those rippling thighs. If we move along the underside, you have got more of the elongating, sagging wrinkles in the neck, slowly gathering as we approach the pectorals. Once you hit the stomach, you'll see all of the running areas of gathering skin forming just past the swell of the gut, and buckling or pulling with the rotation of the limbs. Meanwhile, the soles of the feet come complete with a fleshy pad for weight distribution rather than simply being the typical horseshoe shape associated with sauropods. The soles themselves have been adorned with even more wrinkles, and you have got the logo on the back right foot there. Then if we take a look at the figure's back, you can see the slightly raised spine and accentuated dorsum of the figure, and that has of course been covered in wrinkles and striations that run down the length of the animal all the way to the tip of the tail. Now for the pose. The Giraffatitan has been sculpted in a majestic, ambling posture that really speaks to the awesome presence of this massive animal. I just love the partially curled front right limb and the graceful curve to that huge neck as it meanders forward. While we're appreciating the whole figure, I'll briefly mention some disparities between Giraffatitan and Brachiosaurus. As the story goes, Brachiosaurus was so fragmentary in nature that when Giraffatitan was discovered, many assumed it was simply an African version of the same species, and so Brachiosaurus was filled in with material from the more complete Giraffatitan. This is why our popular image of Brachiosaurus actually better reflects Giraffatitan, but in 2009, Michael Taylor suggested the two were actually different in many ways, and thus the separation between Giraffatitan and Brachiosaurus was born. Again, this is a very broad oversimplification, but for sake of time, I just want to give you guys the key strokes. Some noteworthy differences include a shorter torso and tail, as illustrated by this beautiful skeletal comparison from Paleo King on DeviantArt. The build is also more gracile in general, and with a more upward incline to the raised back, something W-Dragon appears to have captured to a T on their statue here. So overall, the sculpt on this thing gets an A+. Not only are the basic forms very pleasing to look at, but from a scientific point of view, it also seems very faithful to the animal in question. All of that great work was then treated with immaculate skin details that sells both the movement and massive weight of this enormous animal. As far as the paint scheme goes, it is pretty simple, just the stereotypical earth tones across the board. The base tone is a light brown, transitioning to a cream underbelly and darker brown dorsal coloration. Accent colors of rusted orange pop up on the neck and around the joints of the limbs, and you can see that the feet have that wonderful dark gradient feeding up into the cream tones. All of this has then been covered in darker washes and or lighter dry brushing depending on the area of the piece in order to help all of those skin details pop. In some areas, it almost looks like dust or dirt has settled in the striations, which feels appropriate for a large animal. But the real treat to the paint job here would be the banding on the tail. You can see how the dark brown of the dorsal region streaks down over the tail, interrupted by the lighter cream tones to create this ringtail lemur effect. The color is applied so thinly and with such a seamlessly beautiful transition between tones that it really does feel like skin tones as opposed to just paint. This really is the best part of the color scheme in my eyes, and even if the rest of the application is good in its own right, I almost wish they had done something similar elsewhere just for more visual interest. As far as the size of the piece goes, since I needed such a wide frame to fit the whole thing in, I'll have to use the metal tape ruler here to get a length. I'm seeing that it comes in at 16 inches long in a straight measurement, or around 40.5 centimeters. Of course, if you measure along the spine, you're likely to get a lot more, but in terms of shelf real estate, that's what you're looking at from aft to stern. Meanwhile, for a height, you're looking at nearly 17 inches off the ground, or around 43 centimeters. Now, all Giraffatitan size estimates come from specimen HMNS2, which was around 40 feet tall. However, that specimen was still a subadult, so it could have gotten even bigger. That being said, for a 40-foot specimen, that would put this figure at 128 scale, and for it to slot into that popular 135 scale range, you would need a whopping 50-foot tall specimen. Before we move on with comparisons, I'll also say it's just a very hefty figure in general. No hollow vinyl for this guy, it's just a solid reconstruction of both PVC and resin materials, giving it a lot of weight. And whereas I'm not opposed to hollow vinyl figures to save some money, the solid construction of this really is awesome, I will say. Now for size comparisons, and this is going to be a fun one. I'm going to start by bringing in some other large sauropod figures in my collection. First up, we have the big ol' Papobrachiosaurus, which for the longest time held the distinction of being the largest model in my collection. Although it has been dethroned, and not even by this figure, you can see that the W-Dragon Giraffatitan absolutely dwarfs that thing. Next up, we have last year's other big sauropod figure. It's the Nanmu Apatosaurus Bastion, and if I recall correctly, these two would actually be pretty close in terms of being in scale with one another, so that makes this an extra fun comparison. I know I often put Nanmu on a pedestal, usually favoring their products over W-Dragon, but this is one case where I think W-Dragon's sculpt work definitely wins the day, as the detail just feels so much more crisp across the board. That could be chalked up to a material thing, but still, it is worth mentioning. And next up we have some rearing figures, just to show you how tall this Giraffatitan is. Neither the Batat Diplodocus nor PNSO Euhelopus can beat it in terms of height, even when stood on their hind legs. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring in some more recent popular sauropod models just to give you an idea of how small they look alongside the Giraffatitan. First up we have the beautiful Eofauna Atlasaurus, and you can see that he looks absolutely tiny next to that thing, only reaching about a quarter of a way up the neck there. And then we have the recent PNSO Mamenchisaurus Irma, and yeah, if you thought the Atlasaurus looked small next to the W-Dragon piece, Irma is even worse off. She puts up a good fight in the length department, as you would expect from a Mamenchisaur, but she can't even reach to the base of the Giraffatitan's neck here. I should caveat these comparisons by saying most aren't in scale with one another, they're just to give you an idea of the size of the figure itself, but there you have it. Next up we have a familiar friend from the Tendaguru formation. It's the GR Toys Dicraeosaurus, and we've come full circle now. I started this year off with a review of that little guy, and now here he is alongside an old friend and looking absolutely tiny next to him. Okay, now to even the playing field a little bit, here it is alongside the massive PNSO Huangatitan, and even if the Giraffatitan is still a bit taller, it's nowhere near as long or as round as that massive figure. Still, it's the only model I own that even puts up a fight next to that behemoth, and they're actually not terrible in terms of their scale with one another, so there you go. As a final sauropod comparison, this one goes out to you Mattel fans. It's the recently reviewed Apatosaurus, and yeah, I guess that guy does make the Giraffatitan look small, but certainly not from lack of trying. Real quick, I'm also going to go ahead and bring in some other W-Dragon figures for comparison. First up, we have it alongside the massive Spinosaurus, which looks like it might actually be able to make a meal out of this thing. It's certainly big enough, I'll give it that, but it's also interesting to see W-Dragon's movie knockoffs alongside their more scientific endeavors. I guess we know which route won out. And now we have the Giganotosaurus from W-Dragon, another good figure, but certainly on the smaller end. Well, to be fair, I guess it's one of their true 1/35 scale figures, so there's that to consider, I suppose. And finally, we have their amazing Allosaurus model, and I really like how these two look with one another. It's almost as though an Allosaurus has flushed a juvenile from the herd and is now looking for an opportunity to bring it down. Anyway, these look great with one another, and again, it is fun to see W-Dragon's somewhat more accurate figures together. As a final dinosaur comparison, I'm going to bring in another Tendaguru formation friend. It's the Safari Ltd Kentrosaurus, and my word, does he ever look tiny next to that Giraffatitan. And then I'll close out with something a little different. I know I usually like to feature Chris Pratt when it comes to the Nanmu human figures, but come on, this is one situation that 100% calls for John Hammond. Can't you just hear the music playing? I know I can. Maybe I'm just insane. And that was the W-Dragon Giraffatitan, and this is just an all-around dynamite figure. No sense in beating around the bush with this one. It is just a winner in every way. It's so awesome to have another massive sauropod for the shelf, and everything about it is just so well done. I love the pose, I love the details of the skin, and the paintwork is also competent, if a little dull. Seeing how amazing this model turned out makes me a little sad, actually, that other companies don't have the guts to do this kind of big figure anymore. And it's also upsetting that we probably won't be seeing such beautifully accurate renditions from W-Dragon anymore, given that they now hold the Jurassic license. Instead, we're left with an image of what could have been. Or I suppose what could be if other companies pony up to producing big figures once again. I certainly feel this was worth every penny, and I'm sure others would too if more large figures ever came onto the market. For now though, I think I'll just enjoy this one, as it'll probably be some time before anything else even comes close to being this awesome. And with that, Killershrewfan's 12 days of reviews finally comes to an end. I know I fell behind with the last two videos here, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to any viewer of the channel, new or old, who tuned in to any of these videos. As always, your support is the greatest gift I receive, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for getting me another 1,000 subscribers in the year of 2021. It's truly amazing to know that many people and more care about my thoughts on the hobby that I love, and your continued support is what keeps me going. I certainly hope you all enjoyed this year's season of 12 days of reviews, as well as any of the other videos I happen to put out in 2021. It certainly has been another banner year for collecting, and even if I'm way behind on reviewing a lot of new releases, I for one am still looking forward to everything else 2022 has to offer. So from my family to yours, Merry belated Christmas, Happy Holidays, and the happiest of New Year's.